Hi, everybody. You are watching Simply SACdian, no title required. And this is Zoph, your co-host here. And I just realized I didn't change my name. Okay, there. Now I'm Zoph. Okay, so Lucas, my co-host, is not in today. He has an open house at the school that he works at. So it's just me and our amazing guest. But before we get into them, I want to talk about Simply SACdian, no title required. For those who don't know, it is a show for non-peers where we talk to people who have not attained peerage in the SCA because we feel like people who have not attained peerage have just an important voice in the SCA and what's happening in the SCA. So we have made one exception to that rule. I'm sorry, two exceptions to that rule. The first was when we talked to Heather Dale at our live show at Penzic, and the second was when we talked to Baroness Mistress Bree, who is on staff for Penzic War. So we had a Penzic show a couple of years ago, like a year and a half ago. So that's it. Other than that, no peers allowed. Well, except for me, because I'm the co-host, so I'm the only peer allowed. So that being said, we need guests. Please, we have on our Facebook page, we have a link so you can take you to a Google form so that you can recommend people to us. Please fill that out. We do take our guests from that. Usually, unless I know somebody personally and then I hit them up, like in the case of tonight's amazing, awesome, wonderful guest, who is Solveig Bjarnardottir, apprentice to Baron Sabine de Kerbriant and protege to Magister Rowan Cloteworthy. They have been a member of the Society since January 2010. She primarily focuses on music. This is inclusive of vocal performance as well as instrumental, primarily the woodwind family, but some percussive and strung. Solveig has a strong passion for teaching others and making music tangible and a safe place for all. When she is not singing, playing, or teaching, she is getting her hands dirty by running events, serving as the provost of the East Kingdom College of Performers, serving as chatelaine to the Barony of Stonemarch, casting pewter, fencing, embroidery, or sewing. Otherwise, you can see Solveig with her spouse, the love of her life, Wolfgang, and their son, Caleb. Welcome to the show, Solveig.
Thank you.
Again. Okay, so Solveig was our guest when we did the dependent roundtable, and she was so fascinating. Lucas and I knew we had to have her back for her own special show. So the first question we ask everybody is, how did you find the SCA?
Sorry for the repeat story on this one. If you saw the other episode, well, too bad. But once upon a time in 2010, I had been learning how to make chainmail. I did a whole bunch of Ren fairs, loved the high fantasy, the costuming, fell in love with it, and had met a gentleman who taught me to make chainmail. Fast forward to the New Year's party I'd gone to. I brought my rolly kit with me and my pliers, and this gentleman approached me and he goes, "Oh, you make chainmail. You need to join my household and you need to come to this event and you need to do X, Y, and Z." And I went, "Hold your frijoles, friendo. Hi, do you have a name?" And he introduced himself as Matthew Studley, his real mundane name, I kid you not. And he tells me about this craft night thing. And as you ask, do you need to be invited? Who owns the place? Is it far from me? What can I do? Am I going to be murdered in the middle of the night? Like, what's the deal with this? And he explained that this is an open craft night. You can go, you don't have to craft, that the family who owns the home is very kind. They do a bunch of everything. You'll be fine. So I got up my confidence. I'm very much an introvert. I covered up really well and grabbed my rolly kit, my pliers, and I went. And I'm Connecticut born and raised. And so in Connecticut, you learn that you knock at the front door and you're invited in. Well, I went to the front door and I knocked and I got laughed at. Not in a mean way, but laughed because, this is New Hampshire and you don't knock, you let yourself in. You don't go to the front door. Nobody uses the front door. And so I went in, I sat there at their table, which is large enough probably to fill about 10 people or so. And I was surrounded by warm, smiling faces. There were people embroidering, there were people knitting, there were people brewing. The owner of the home is now a brewing laurel, but at that time was not. I don't even think he had his munch at that point. And his wife, again, had only had her AOA-related levels at that point, nothing further. And nobody there in that house was a peer. Everybody there was just happy to be crafting, happy to do a thing. And so I felt safe. And so I went back the next week. Rinse, lather, repeat. But this time, they telling me more about the SCA, what's there going on, what you can do. And I said, okay. And they're like, you can do it. It's just like a Ren fair, but with more homework. I say, cool. Went the third week. They start talking about this event called Burqa. And if you're not from the East Kingdom, it's a little shopping event with maybe 1,200, 2,000 people who show up. And I go, what is a burqa? And so they explained to me, it's very much like a medieval convention that happens inside.
Very much like a medieval.
So I reverb. And so I said, okay, what should I wear? Can I wear Renaissance clothes? Like, what can I wear? And they said, yeah, no one will say anything. You can wear whatever you wear to the Ren Fair. So my first time going, I was offered up a room with someone who happened to be on staff for the event, and she had a room to share, and I said, okay. And I went in my very period appropriate black and blue leather bodice and my very modern medieval blue velvet skirt and my leather bracers and my chainmail covered bottles, which I had done myself, filled with their blue magic water in them. And I went to Burqa. And I was introduced to a couple of folks who were running gate, and they asked if I wanted to work at the event. You get into the event for free for this particular one. If you work gate, they'll feed you. And I said, sure. Helium hand has always been a problem of mine. So I worked at gate and I fell in love with the event. I met so many people that day. I went to the ball. I fell in love with the ball. I'm not much of a dancer, but they made a dancer out of me at that point. And the whole fantasy, the whole romance of the SCA was that event for me. So finding this family and then finding a home. And I've been back ever since. I couldn't give it up.
So did you meet your husband, Wolfgang, in the SCA?
I did not. I dragged him in kicking and screaming. He would laugh at that statement. I met him on ye olde dating apps. And after we had been dating for a few months, I explained to him, I said, there's this activity I'm super into. I don't know how you're going to feel about it. You have to dress up. You don't have to be super, super accurate, but you need to, give an attempt. And he goes, oh, when can I go? Very exciting, to the point where he made his own garb for the event. I taught him how to sew a very basic Viking tunic and pants, and he made his own. And then the night before, in true SACdian style, he decided that he needed a haversack. So he made a haversack from scratch the night before. And we went, and he too very much fell in love with the SCA at that point.
That's awesome. So you are an apprentice and a protege. How does that work for you? Do you feel sometimes like you have divided loyalties? I mean, I know that Sabine and Rowan are, in the modern world, they're friends as well as in the SCA, but is there ever a tug of war in your heart?
The tug of war doesn't fall under them. They're incredibly supportive and communicative with each other as well. And there's great conversations with us in person as well as digitally. The compromise comes with the dedication of time of, am I doing service? Am I doing my art? Or am I doing service for my art? And so it's finding the balance between them, making sure that I'm still getting seen as a performer, that I'm still having time to teach, but also making sure that I can have pure service moments as well. And there's always been a lot of conversation around this of art as a service. Some people think of art as a service as, making regalia for the royals or the baron and baroness or others, or doing things, or doing scrolls, but they don't always think about running events for your arts or performing as part of a coronation ceremony or performing parts as a service for the art. So there's making sure that there's clear boundaries sometimes, and that you're being seen doing what you need to be seen doing. Yes, you don't do it for the cookie, so to speak, But if you are interested in that path and being seen clearly doing those things, it has to be clear to even the most untrained individuals who happen to be, the polling order of what you were doing and why that is a service. So it's, again, finding the fine balance between them.
So you mentioned polling order, and one of the awards you mentioned earlier that the brewing, who's now a brewing laurel, that they have a maunch. Can you explain for the non-EK people what a maunch is?
Yes. So the Order of the Maunch is a polling order for exceptional work in the arts and sciences. In the East Kingdom, we actually have polling. I know that not all kingdoms have a polling order. This is what's considered an order of high merit or a grant level award. So it's the second tier. In the East, we have 3 sets of awards. We have your first level awards, which are essentially your award of arm level awards, which are all silver related ones, except, and then you have your mid-tier awards, and then you have your peerages. So this one sits right in between.
And it's for arts and sciences.
Yes, this one is for arts and sciences.
Okay, so when I first met you, you sang, and I was transported to heaven. How long have you been singing?
Singing or singing well? Those are 2 very different questions. So the brief answer is all my life. I was brought up in a very musical family. And by musical, I mean listening to music. My folks can barely carry a tune in a bucket. It's not pleasant to listen to, but they love doing it. And so they have a passion for it, which is part of where my inspiration comes from to make music safe and tangible. My sisters, 2 sisters, are both, they can sing, but again, they're not trained singers. And then there's me, who follow the kind of the footsteps of the musicians who are my aunts and uncles, and then the generations. Grew up singing in the choirs in school, like doing musical theater, Broadway girl through and through. Grew up listening to Les Mis, except for the muted parts, and a whole lot of klezmer, as you do in a Jewish family. And then by the time I got to high school, I found out that I had above average potential and skill. I started taking private voice lessons when I was 13. I'd also taken piano lessons. I was also a clarinetist from the age of 9 on. And so those musical skills all start to build to each other. And I decided that I wanted to become an exceptional music teacher who could potentially sing better than average. When I went to college, I double majored in vocal performance and music ed with these anticipations, and then found out that my sophomore year that I had a really rare voice type, or Fach as you call it, which means book or category. And finding out that I had a rare voice type, and also that my skills had been growing rapidly, my focus very quickly shifted to performance from teaching. I still enjoyed teaching tremendously, but I was focusing more on singing the operas and performing and doing that. And so singing well and singing focus really started in 2004 when I started my undergraduate, and ever since I've never let it drop.
So you still sing. I mean, I know you sing in the SCA, but do you sing in the modern world as well?
I don't. Part of that is a time commitment thing, and part of it is there's still some anxiety about going to modern groups. Part of that is in modern music, there's guilds and unions that you need to join to be in a lot of performances, especially in the opera world. They really want to see you in a union. Musical theater, you have to have the right stuff. They want to see you dancing. I'm not much of a dancer. And so there's this thing. And then choirs, they want to know, what your sight reading is like. They want to know that you can do. And I haven't really found a group local to me that rehearses at a time that's convenient for my family and doesn't need a whole in-depth audition process. So some of that is anxiety of returning to that. And some of that is just schedule.
So you said you have a rare voice type. I have never in my life heard of that. What does that mean?
So within the world of classical voice, there again is this thing called Fach. Again, and Fach means book or category. Have you heard the term soprano, alto, tenor, baritone, bass?
Yeah, I'm a mezzo,
So,
so yeah.
so within those, you have descriptive categories. What those descriptive categories talk about is how large your voice is and how quickly it moves. The larger your voice is, the darker your voice is, the longer it takes to develop typically. And within those categories, you have the light voices, you get soubrette and spinto. Then you have the kind of middle voices of lyric, light lyric and lyric. And then you have the darker voices, which you have as baby dramatic and dramatic. Then within those, you also have the descriptor of coloratura, which means your voice moves quickly, and that can be added to other vocal types. Typically, you're going to see a lyric coloratura or lighter voices. It's very rare that you're going to see a dramatic coloratura. A good example of that would be like the Queen of the Night would be.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, because she's a coloratura, and that's because of the quick movement, not because of the high notes, or is it both?
It's because of the fast movement. The high notes are what's described as your tessitura or your range. So the soprano would be that tessitura. So a coloratura soprano would be that fast moving soprano, and likely categorized as a full lyric to a baby dramatic or dramatic, depending on who you want to cast and what you have envisioned for this role.
See, I always thought that my problem as a singer, and I'm a Broadway baby, classically trained, not opera, but more Broadway, was that I just wasn't training right to be able to have the quick, Queen of the Night bobbles. And you're saying that it's just the way the voice is, and there's probably very little I could do to change the tempo at which I can change notes.
Right, because that's all contingent on your instrument itself. So I've got this large honking instrument, and singing anything of speed takes a lot of time. And by speed, I mean what should be expected of my instrument takes time. So working through those passages at very slow tempos and then speeding them up.
Right.
So, but yeah, it's a lot of what you're, nature versus nurture in that case.
So when I met you, you were singing, and then all of a sudden you started performing, playing music. So what was it, Mr. Sabine Baron who got you to start playing wind instruments in the SCA, or was that your own drive?
Part of it was Sabine, and part of it was my desire to not be a solo performer all the time. I don't really often get a chance to be part of an ensemble. And again, as an introvert, I like to just kind of blend in and be a part of a group sometimes and not be center stage all the time. So that would give me an excuse to do and to be a part of ensembles. And part of it was also trying to appear as a more well-rounded instrumentalist. Like I had been playing recorder since grade school, and it comes in and out. You go through fourth grade and they teach you how to poorly blow in a recorder and you call it good. In college, I had to do it again. For my classroom instruments classes, I had to do recorder, clarinet, trumpet, saxophone, percussion, violin, viola. I think that's it for instruments. And guitar. So I had to learn all those instruments as well. And so having that background coming back and being the clarinetist, the fingerings are very similar in one of the octaves. So it was kind of natural to pick up again. So the influence was there from Sabine, also kind of, like master, like student, let's mimic the master and see what we can do. So that's where some of that came from. And I can say she definitely influenced me on wanting to pick up Gemshorns, because who doesn't want to look like a silly rhinoceros running around?
Wait, a what? What is this? What is this instrument?
A Gemshorn or Gemshorn, it is, imagine like a rhinoceros horn. It's from an animal called the gemsbok, which is a goat-like creature, and they're hollow inside the horn, and they'll carve fingering holes out of it. And there's what's called a fipple, which is where you blow air into, and the sound hole. And depending on if you have one with a mouthpiece on it or a flat one, it sits on the front of your face right here. So you have this essentially what looks like a drinking horn coming out of your chin.
That's awesome. Okay, and I'm glad I asked that, because somebody just commented Thomas Terry says, okay, I need to hear you do Liebstod from T&I. Another time. Wait, another time. So I want to ask you next. You're talking about things and it's been bringing up questions for me. EK College of Performers. What is the East Kingdom College of Performers and what is your role? How long has it been around? Tell me all about it.
The East Kingdom College of Performers is a college within the SCA which promotes performance of all kind. They have a history initially, the Royal Chartered, I'm going to butcher this because I'm a little out of history on this one. It was the Royally Chartered Performers or Bardic group, and there was some controversy over the word bard, and so they regrouped as a performance group as opposed to what was considered the Bardic arts, even though it's a more inclusive group. It's been I can't tell you how long it's been around. I can just say a while. I should know better, but I don't. And I have been a part of the college since 2018 or so, where I served as deputy chatelaine for a little while, which is the newcomer welcomer, essentially. And now I have been serving as the provost, which is essentially the chapter president, and have been serving as chapter president for 2 years now, I believe. And our terms are about 3 years, and we can stay on as long as we want, but sometimes we have to let it grow in other people's hands.
Right. So there's two deeper questions that I want to get into. And the first is, if you ask 10 performers what makes a bard, you'll get 12 answers. So it is one of the most contentious terms, I think, in the SCA, more contentious, I think, than rhino hiding. So what's the difference, in your opinion, between a bard and a performer?
In my opinion, what makes a bard is that they're someone who is there typically by themselves. And I will say typically because there are, certainly exceptions. Someone who is telling a story through some kind of performance as typically a solo artist, where a performer is typically more in the background or as an ensemble group where you can perform, but you're not trying to necessarily grab attention and not necessarily telling a story. You're there to create atmosphere. And there's also going in deeper where people will talk about, well, a bard has to be a singer or an instrumentalist or storyteller or a poet. And I also would argue, and again, there's been a lot of conversation about this, that dancers are also bards. If you go back to the original definition of ballet, ballet is a story told through dance. And I believe in my heart of hearts that anything, if you were telling a story, can be a bard. So I don't believe that there is a limitation of performing arts of anything. If it comes from the soul and you're creating that moment and that story, and you're bringing the news, that you are a bard.
It's okay. I that is different from my definitions, but this is your hour, not the Zoph hour. So I think that's a really valid description, though. I think that really sort of sums it up. Why do you think there's so much fighting about these terms, or discontent, discussion, intense discussion? Why is there so much intense discussion about the term bard?
We all have our romantic vision of what we think is a bard. And I think some of it is the connotation that sometimes bards are obnoxious or dirty or filthy, that they're only lewd creatures. And I think some folks don't want to be included in that persona and that attribution, that they think that bards are nothing but that and that they have no tact. And so there's this divide that way. So they want to exclude themselves from that. I think some of it might be elitist behavior, that some folks are trying to say, well, you're not a bard because you don't fit this criteria. If you want to be the royal bard or the baronial bard or the provincial bard, you must have these qualities and you must do these things. And with arts, with martial skills, there's always somebody who needs to one up someone else. It's everywhere. It's every activity we do in the real world, in the SCA. We have mixed feelings about everything. And so I suspect in this case that we have a combination of poor associations, but also elitist behaviors that come in. But where I've always tried to be an inclusionary individual, I think that's kind of where my romanticized view that anyone can be a performer is, and or a bard rather, versus just a performer.
At Penzic, you performed with Colette the Bard, David, whose SCA name I can't remember right now, and a bunch of, yeah, Jeffrey of Exeter, thank you, and a bunch of other performers, and did an astounding concert. Yeah, Bird was there. I can't remember everybody. Ablin, and it was an amazing concert. I can't remember even the name of the group. What do you guys call yourselves?
Songbirds.
Songbirds, thank you. So how did that group come about and how did you get involved?
So the group started actually before the pandemic. Bird and I and Colette had decided that the three of us wanted to do a concert together. I have always died to want to sing with Colette. They're an incredible songwriter, incredible vocalist.
Okay, hold on, y'all.
Album.
What's her album under? If you can find Colette the Bard's music, go find Colette the Bard's music, because they have got the most beautiful butterscotch voice I've ever heard in my life. Solveig has a beautiful voice in a very different way, but oh my God. Okay, go ahead. So.
And like I was going to say, I listen to Colette almost every day at work, if not, every other day, and have to introduce their music to everyone. And Bird has been my performance sibling for as long as I've met them. And so I thought, because each of us, Bird, attributes himself as a bluebird, Colette attributes themselves as a magpie, and I attribute myself as a raven. And so with the play on the spelling, it's spelled after William Byrd, who is a period composer. So we spell it Byrds after William Byrd. And so we have that play on that. We had added my student for a couple pieces to that concert as well, because we wanted to allow them a moment to shine and be seen, as their teacher, letting them be seen and helping them get over stage fright and things. Then the pandemic hit, things happened, and we wanted to do another concert together. And we have other very, very talented friends. So we asked Evelyn and Matthias to join us. We asked Leaf to join us. We asked Jeffrey to join us. And the group just kept growing. And we had people come and go, and, we went through that. And the group just harmoniously happened. Everybody was really flexible about what voice parts we could sing. We chose music that wasn't in most extremities of the ranges. So people could flip-flop between pieces and not feel like, well, I'm a soprano, I have to sing the soprano line, and I'm a bass, so I have to sing the bass line. And so that group just conversed online, and we picked Repertoire, and we all chose Repertoire together, and we had very little rehearsal time.
That's what I was going to ask. Go ahead. Yeah, how much rehearsal time did you have? Because you're all in different, Florida and the West Coast and Australia.
Everyone's in a different kingdom, with the exception of Colette and Robin. Everybody's in a different kingdom. So we met up at Silver Oak, and we had 2-hour rehearsals, and that was it.
Well, you blew me away with the amazingness, and I've been in the SCA for 30 years and been a performer for all of it, and I have never been so blown away as a performance as I was with all of yours. And I hope that you'll be back next year, and everybody watching, go see the Songbirds if you can at Penzic, because they're amazing.
So next year, a little sneak preview is we already have another concert coming, and we're going to call it Macho Man.
That is awesome.
On the show all the time. So we're going to do a whole Macho concert, and then we may do some other ones as well as a separate performance.
Yay. You mentioned that you have a student. So that's something that's not done as much where I live in the mid realm. There are some people who have students who are dependents who have their own students. What is the responsibility? What's your responsibility to a student of yours?
I focus primarily with my students on the arts themselves. All three of my students are all performing artists, each with very different skill sets. And what I do is I hone in on their areas of opportunity. I don't call them weak points because they're not weak points, they're just areas of growth for everyone. So one of my students, Enya, as she would say, sounds like the singer spelled like the sneeze. She has a lot of stage fright, and we're working through stage fright and stage presence with her. She doesn't need much feedback from me in the performing arts. She has an incredible singing voice, a great sense of music. She's mundanely a music teacher, so she doesn't need that from me. And then networking is a piece that I have. I wouldn't say I'm a household name per se in the East, but my name gets around. So the connection and association of having her being seen. My student Drewston is working again very much on stage presence and getting his pieces. He writes a lot of his own stuff, and he's focusing on the content of his pieces and getting those out. So I'll help support his wordsmithing, getting him out to be seen as well, encouraging his performances and getting people to see him as well, and getting him the opportunities. And then also he served a large role in the East Kingdom College of Performers as our chatelaine as well for several years. And then my last student, Damien, is a very, very, very baby bard. We're working on getting him repertoire, and we're getting him over his nerves. We're starting on pieces like We Be Soldiers 3, which, many folks may know and have enjoyed singing, but, it's tangible repertoire for him to be comfortable and to create his own space. So we're working through finding him repertoire, finding him what makes him feel comfortable, finding him that performer's headspace, because he wants to perform, but he doesn't necessarily know where to find the pieces. And for each of my students, I never promise them that or expect that they'll want to follow a peerage path. What I'm doing for them is making a tangible area for them to go and to grow. They may not have that desire to be a peer, but I will teach anyone, and they just want to hang out with me. And I say, well, you're stuck with me until you decide otherwise. So it's primarily focusing on the area for them and what they want to learn. We're not focusing on a peerage path. We're not focusing on the PLQs, the peer-like qualities. We're focusing on what makes them feel good and what makes them feel whole as performers. So it's not necessarily a true SCA peer-student relationship. It's one of kind of more like a more private teacher.
So you brought up something that I have been, so those who don't know me, I do mostly storytelling. I don't really sing very much. If I do, it's pieces that I've written that are usually marching, fighting, kick butt songs. And one of the things I've started working on with my voice teacher is starting to do more period pieces so that I can go to SCA events and sing if I want to. But at the first glance, everything I'm finding is Trois Corbies and Du C'est dans mes jolies and, We Be Soldiers 3. So how does a newer singer to period music, where's a start to finding not necessarily obscure, but not the done so much pieces? Where do people start with that?
I think it really just depends on what your interest is. For me, I like the super, dramatic, over the top Dowland stuff. So that's kind of, where I'm going for my pleasure. If you want something that's a little bit more under the table raunchy, we would send you to some of the French pieces, because if you translate them, they're less than polite conversation. If you're it depends on your interest level. If you want to just do filks, you can do filks and we can send you filks, but that's not what the period pieces you're looking for. But what I do is, again, I try to find out what people are looking for. There's lots of great websites out there. If you want to be engrossed and do like a composer search, so you can start your search on, online to say, who are the composers who lived during this time period? And they'll give you a list. And then you can go through, IMSLP, which has all, for the most part, I believe it's all free sheet music on there. Some of it's been handwritten, some of it's been annotated in, and some of it's just scanned in. If you're looking for choral pieces that can be turned into solo pieces, you can look at SACdian on there. But there's also folks who have multiple pages of SEA music. There's YouTube, there's several YouTube channels. Shava Sue has them on YouTube, so you can look through her stuff. You can also look and see who some of the artists are. If you look up some of them, you can find like Michael Kelly and his performing stuff. Again, you can look at Colette and some of their stuff. You can look up, look up my name, you can look up Solveig Bjarnardottir, and you can see, my stuff, and you can kind of start those rabbit holes from there and see where they go. Because you might hear something that you like on these YouTube channels and go, oh, I want to make that my style. Like, that's what I want. Some people will choose it based on persona. If you're like me, who's, 15th, 16th century German, we're going to be looking at these later German pieces. If you're someone who doesn't care about time period, you're going to look for what makes you feel good and what sounds good to you. So it doesn't necessarily answer your question, but it's kind of where you can start and branch off.
Right. Yeah. So thank you to Johannes for sharing a link to Colette the Bard's Facebook page. Thank you. Thank you. And Diana Enman says, love you, Solveig. Yay. We all love Solveig. You were royal bard for the East Kingdom a year ago. Whose bard were you? Were you the consort or the king's?
I was consort's bard.
So what was that for people who have never been to? It's a competition, first of all, we should say, in the East Kingdom, unlike in the Mid-Realm where I'm from, where they just pick somebody. So what was that process like for you? I know people that have spent a year preparing for the competition. What did you do to prepare for it?
So typically after the last year is done, I start looking at my repertoire. If there's things that I want to learn, there's things I want to brush up on, pieces, and there's a lot of folks who try to play the game of anticipating, who's on the throne, what are some of the things they're going to want to hear. So some people try to play that game. For me, I've tried to play that game, and I've also tried to go with what I think they want to hear, and that never worked for me. I stopped trying to focus on trying to be as diverse as possible. There was years where I bought singing and storytelling, and I'm an okay storyteller, but it's not my forte. I'm through and through a singer who can tell stories and who can play instruments. So for this particular competition, the theme was given about war, and especially with all the real wars happening in the world, I didn't want to bring sadness to the group. There's already enough suffering in the world with COVID and pieces so I looked at who's on the throne, and I kind of said, okay, it was Ryu and Indrakshi who were sitting on the throne, and then Prince and Princess were Mo and Kortika. And so I just ignored that, and I picked pieces which made me feel good and made me feel powerful. I opened with telling a story because I thought it'd be fun, not because I wanted anything more. I wanted to bring brevity to the group. I wanted to bring laughter. And that was important to me. So I told a piece called about the time I caught the red dragon. And that's a story in threes where you basically tell the same story 3 times over with a small changing of details, and then there's some kind of a moral or a pun or some kind of humor at the end of the story summarizing it. Round 2 was the piece that I really wanted to focus on, and I wanted to do a Launch Connect piece, which is what my persona is based off of, are the mercenaries from the Launch Connect group. And so I found this piece called Unsere liebe Frauen, which is one of the pieces they would sing while they were marching, and it happens to be one about them marching back from war. And them going out to the bars and going drinking, and it's hot, it's cold, it's how are we doing this, and oh, we're hitting the bars. And then what was really exciting this year, so typically they'll request from you your resume, which your resume is what are you able to perform, and what have you kind of achieved. So what are your awards in this area, and what can you do at the drop of a dime. And this is the first year that I've actually gotten talked to about my resume. Typically, what I've heard from other champions is that they had their resume, looked at, and they picked something that they thought perhaps each of the performers could answer in a certain way. So one year it was seasons, and so they asked somebody to write a poem about seasons. They asked someone to sing something about seasons, and you can interpret it their way. This year, or that year, when I went to the finals, His Majesty Ryu had asked me to sing or to perform something in a piece called Ladino. Ladino is a very dead language, which was only around for about 150 years. And it's a combination of mostly Spanish and Hebrew. There's Swiss and German and other small tidbits of the language, but mostly Spanish and Hebrew, which, again, as I mentioned earlier, my family's Jewish. So I like to bring a little bit of that with me. I don't practice Judaism currently, but I still will always tell people that I'm Jewish. And His Majesty was interested because he had never heard of Ladino, and being very ethnically Spanish of some type, and I apologize, I don't know the full details of his background. He wanted to hear this. He was intrigued by this. And the piece that I chose to sing was a piece that was also about love and loss. And it made me feel good and whole. It's a piece that brought me joy. And it's a piece that I knew my husband loved to listen to. And it's a piece that I think, again, brings that romance and that drama to the performance, which is something I'm very passionate about, is that drama and that glimmer, but being connected to the music. I believe that there always has to be a connection to your performance. And so that piece is very connected to me. I've probably been performing it since 2018. It was when Vienna was on the throne, was the first time I've ever performed that piece. And that to me was how I chose my pieces, was, again, to surmise, what made me feel good and what made me feel powerful and what made me feel comfortable. And I'll tell a fun secret about this. Your performances don't need to be perfect. I had all my words memorized for round 2 in German. Guess what happened the moment I got up on the stage?
Forgot it all.
Gone. Made up every single word until I remembered some, sang them, lost them again, sang some new words. There was some Wiener Schnitzel and trinken ein Bier in there, and genau ich liebe mein Freund, mein Herz vor Schmerz gebrochen ist. Like those words, whatever could pop into my brain that was German, it just flowed out. I could sing the whole thing for you now because the words are there, but when you get into performance, it's gone. And also in the last performance, which was the chorus, which was repeated, I made it to the last line and the words were gone. And I turned it into a dramatic pause. And wouldn't you know, that's what did it for the audience. So find your pieces, find what you're passionate about, and that's how you pick. Don't worry about what they want. Like, yes, there's a theme, but
don't play
what makes you feel good.
Yeah, I know people who've talked about playing the game, and I think that takes away from the whole point of it, which is find your joy, bring your joy. So the last question I have for you before we get into the last question is, you talked about service for your art. And this is something that has been coming up in discussions in a couple different circles that I'm in. Whereas there's a difference between art, service, and service towards your art. And that service towards your art doesn't count as real service. That doesn't count towards your Silver Crescent, or in the mid-realm, your Dragon's Heart, right? That is different because it's still your art and you're just making the art happen. So I wanted to just, have a conversation about that. What are your thoughts on delineating between service and service for your art?
So I think there's a couple different ways that you can look at service for your art. There are some arts that I do which are not anything closely related to my performance. Performance is my true art that I do, but I love dabbling in pewter casting. And I have made, let's see, it was 500 double-sided tokens for Fortune's Reign, for her site tokens. I've made 75 brooches for Sabine's Elevation. I have made probably at least 75 to 100 medallions donated to the kingdom for awards, for silver level awards. And I'm getting towards working on the middle tier awards for our kingdom. And so I would consider that a service, you know, through art. It's not my primary art, but it's a service. We also have to remember that not everybody is going to be passionate about our arts, and they're not going to want to host an event for our arts or make our art seen. There's a lot of focus on the martials, specifically with armored combat and rapier. And then beyond that, the arts are usually put into a room on their side. They're not necessarily the main display unless you're looking at the Arts and Sciences Championship or St. Eligius, which is an East Kingdom event in which there's different levels that you can compete in for your arts and sciences. And then days where you just have classes, events where you just have classes, but there's typically always martial happening at these events. So if we don't have folks who are willing to host these events, even though it's their art that they're hosting it for, who's going to host them? Then we have people who want to create the art but can't do it on their own. So for instance, I run an ad hoc choir, you know, a choir that music gets sent out ahead of time. You can look at it ahead of time, but we learn it at the event and we perform it either for ourselves or maybe at a Bardic Circle or maybe at coronations. I also run a rounds class where people can come and learn rounds and they'll have a chance to sing them. And so that's my art, but I'm doing it as a service. I'm teaching, yes, but I'm doing it for the community because they can't do it on their own without that leadership and that service. We can't have these things going. And then if you think about scribes, yes, they have their art, but they can't make their art for the, like they can make a bunch of art, but why are they going to have 800 scrolls in their house? What are they going to do with these? So they're putting in 30 to 50 hours a scroll each. Bless them all. Like I covet my scrolls. And if I ever didn't get one, I don't know if you, in these kingdoms, you pretty much get a scroll for every award. I'm not sure that that's throughout the rest of the kingdoms as well. But our kingdom, like we have scrolls for everything. And that is a tremendous service. I know scribes who pump out multiple scribes a month, some multiple a week. I don't know how they do it. They must all have carpal tunnel or tarsal tunnel at this point. But that's an incredible service that they give. And so you can't ignore the money that they donate, the time that they donate, the research that they do for these people, because these are not necessarily things that they wanted to research or do. They're doing this because it needs to get done. So if you think about these arts that are being done for the sake of others, it's not necessarily someone wants to study themselves. Anne de Bastion had created these gorgeous cloaks for the royalty with the heraldry of all the East Kingdom groups on the cloaks. That's a service right there. And that's an art being done. Regalia being made for people, for their laurels, for their, for the ogres, they get rapiers. Those are handmade. The spurs, the belts, people put passion to this. And this, again, not necessarily things people want to make, but they have to get done. We do them out of love, but we also do them as a service. So you can't exclude that. Now, there are some people who will just make art for the sake of art, and they're doing it for themselves, and that's different. That's art for art. But if you look at individuals who are putting in time for others, that's where we look at that as a service.
And I wish more politically incorrect Zoph says, yo, royals, get off your doofuses and start recognizing those people for the service that they're doing and stop worrying about whether or not they're masters at their art. Recognize that they're masters at their service at this point. All right. Wow. It's already 10 minutes to go. So time for the last question. What can the SCA do better?
Oh, that is a loaded question. The first thing I will say before I give any definitions or pointing any fingers or anything is I will say that we can always do better. Everyone can always do better. We are all human. We are creatures of growth. But I think the biggest thing that we as a society, meaning the SCA society, can do better is learning from our mistakes and learning to grow. There is a significant amount of folks who can be somewhat stuck in their ways. And sometimes their ways are correct and sometimes they're not. But we need to learn that our human society is changing, that things can be done better. Things can be tried, and if they fail, they fail. But we need to give things a shot. One of the big conversations that I've heard a lot of back and forth about is how we decide our royalty. And the conversation is, well, it's combat. We've always done it by combat. That's how they do it in history. Well, there's a view of, is this ableist? Is this leading it to a group that only has a specific, interest? Why should they be able to get to do this, as a leader? There's discussion of, why can't we rotate it? How can we make this, more fair? Can we bring it to the arts and sciences one year? Can we bring it to the fencers? Can we bring it to thrown weapons? Can we make it like a team event where you can have one person as your head and you have a team, and each of them will work for points to add to your overall score, to make it a group effort? Can this be an elected position? So looking at that kind of a situation, I know there was one group, I want to say it was LOCAC, but I could be very, very wrong, who did put in a suggestion to the bod, and it was turned down without even being tried. So why can't we learn and grow from this? We're still working through DEI ventures. Mundanely, I'm an ADA compliance officer, Americans with Disabilities Act compliance officer. And so DEI is not just about race and ethnicity, it's also about physical ability level. I'm going to speak specifically to this one, which is very close to my heart, is why do we need to travel and do everything in person? We are in the age of digital. We have our websites. We very much rely on our wikis and on our blogs to be able to get, especially ephemeral arts out there, to be seen. There was talk at Penzic this year about needing judges for the ANS Not War Point. And they couldn't get enough. And there was an individual who had offered to do it online, and they were told no. The reason given was that it was a tight schedule, and that's to be understood, but how is that different than bringing a phone with you or a tablet or a computer, right? Also expecting people to travel, there's financial restrictions with that. There's physical restrictions to that. There's also workload restrictions. Some people can't make as many events because they have to work weekends. People have families. I've often heard the story that if you're a family, especially with children, good luck getting your peerage. That's, it's considered, you're considered to be, I'm missing a word in my vocabulary right now, but essentially you have special privilege. There we go. You're privileged if you don't have a family, because you have more flexibility to travel and to do. And so if you need to watch your child, you need to figure out who's watching the child, who's doing what. And if you have a spouse or spouses, plural, if you're within the poly community, or partners, I should say, in the poly community, who's taking shifts, who's supporting and doing what. So you have that. So really, accessibility isn't just about ramps. It's not just about making sure that people can sleep and breathe and have electricity. It's also thinking about how we can make documentation accessible, people's pieces accessible without necessarily being able to travel. COVID is still very much a thing. I've got a friend who suffered very, very, very much from long COVID. We thought that they were going to die, and they're still being expected to be in person for events. When they're lucky if they can breathe half the time. And if they can breathe, if they have the energy levels to get there. So we need to really focus on not being so ableist. I'm not saying that, we're completely ableist, but it's definitely a thought process. But yeah, inclusivity. And I think the largest other item I think that we can really improve on is feedback. And feedback being given in constructive and consent, a way given in consent. There's not always consent given when people are given feedback. And you don't know what's going through people's minds at that moment. You don't know if they're ready for feedback. You don't know if they wanted feedback. Sometimes people are just doing it for the joy of doing it. We need to learn to ask would you like feedback? And if so, what kind of feedback would you like? Would you like just simply this was great or not? Or how constructive of feedback would you like? And into what depth? So we need to be considerate of feedback, how it's given, and learning to balance that feedback with positives and not just the areas of opportunity. So I think those are the three things I'd really focus on is, those points and how we can grow as a society. So learning how we can grow and continuing to grow and trying things, being inclusive, and feedback.
You are so awesome. That was really brilliantly put. Thank you so much. And look for me to have my quote of the day tomorrow in the SCA. Accessibility is about more than ramps. That is so I had to write it down because it's so spot on. We are out of time. I can't believe it. This hour is, 55 minutes have flown by. Thank you so much, Solveig, for being my guest.
My absolute pleasure.
All right, this is Zoph. You're watching Simply SACdian, no title required. We will be back in 2 weeks with, I can't remember his SCA name, so it's going to be a surprise, I guess. See y'all in 2 weeks. Have a good one. Thank you, Solveig.
Thank you, Zoph.